More than 4 million people visit Scotland's capital city each year, and top of the list of attractions the city has to offer are Edinburgh Castle, the Royal Mile, Arthur's Seat, Holyrood Palace, the National Museum of Scotland, and the Royal Yacht Britannia. Tour guides shepherd groups of tourists up and down the bustling Royal Mile, regaling them with tales of Deacon Brodie or Greyfriars Bobby. But few ever mention one of Scotland's most important historic buildings, probably because so few even know that this building still exists, or the role that it played in Scotland's history. So what is this forgotten building? Join us now as we take a glimpse into Scotland's forgotten Parliament. Before we travel back in time, please like and share this video and subscribe to the Scotland channel. Your support will help us to tell Scotland's real story and showcase Scotland to the world. Most people believe that Scotland's Parliament is the one designed by Spanish architect Enrique Miralles, who died before its completion in 2004. From 1999, when Scots voted for devolution, until the opening of the new building in 2004, committee rooms and the debating chamber of the Scottish Parliament were housed in the General Assembly Hall of the Church of Scotland, located on the Mound in Edinburgh. But the new Scottish Parliament is not a replacement of the Parliament Scotland lost in 1707. For one thing, it is not the Parliament of an independent state, unlike the Parliament which existed until 1707. It is, in reality, a branch of the Westminster Parliament in London, with some limited powers devolved to it. Scotland's last independent Parliament building lies beyond the door at number 11, Parliament Square in Edinburgh. At first glance, it is the entrance to Scotland's Supreme Court, the Court of Session. And although the name Parliament Square is something of a giveaway, many assume that the Parliament where the Acts of Union were debated in 1706 has long since been demolished, making way for the present Law Courts building instead. However, this is not entirely the case. This original building, which served as the legislature of Scotland from 1639 to 1707 when it ceased to exist, is still there behind a different frontage built as a result of successive works carried out in the late 19th century to the design of Robert Reid. And although it looks completely different to its appearance in 1707, the building of that original and mostly forgotten Parliament remains within the wider complex of the law courts, including the original debating chamber, now used by advocates to call the office or speak with clients during recess. It is worth noting that whilst the Scottish Parliament was completely dissolved, the English Parliament was not. It effectively continued unchanged, except now it had control over Scotland too. Had the English Parliament been completely dissolved, as was meant to happen as part of the creation of an entirely new state, the United Kingdom of Great Britain, then all the Parliament's provenance, its laws and traditions dating back to the 13th century, would have ceased with it. The new Parliament would have started completely from scratch in 1707. It didn't. Nothing changed. The English Parliament simply continued on exactly as before, and on the day of the treaty's ratification during the day's usual parliamentary business, it garnered barely a mention. The original Palace of Westminster burned down in 1834, with only the significant medieval parts surviving, those being Westminster Hall, the cloisters of St. Stephen, the Chapel of St. Mary Undercroft, and the Jewel Tower. Today's world-famous building and tourist magnet, with its equally famous clock, Big Ben, was not completed until 1870, some 163 years after the Union, and a telltale sign that it was and still is very much the English Parliament can be seen throughout, but especially on the ornate clock face, where there are rows of St. George's, not Union flags, incorporated in the design. Prior to the last Parliament of Scotland, which, unlike its English counterpart, ceased to exist in 1707, Scotland's Parliament met in a variety of places including Perth, Stirling, St. Andrews, and Inverness, sometimes in a church, palace or castle, until the Parliament situated in Parliament Square, Edinburgh, was built in 1639. It was only from the reign of James II that Edinburgh increasingly became the home of the Parliament, and initially it met in the old Tolbooth, demolished in 1817, then the town council building near St. Giles Cathedral. The completion of the Parliament House in 1639 at last gave the Assembly a permanent home, even though it moved around a bit in the 1640s. For example, the session of Parliament in 1645 to 1646 moved to St Andrews to avoid the plague that ravaged Edinburgh. A pointer to the original 1639 Parliament building is a stone pediment set above the doorway to the west of door number 11, the style of which is similar to other buildings of the early 17th century, with which Sir James Murray, who was responsible for the design of the original Parliament, was also responsible. Access to Parliament Hall, formerly the debating chamber of this single-chamber Parliament, is through this door. The most striking feature of the hall itself is its truly magnificent open timber roof, constructed between 1637 and 1639 using oak from the Baltic. It has remained unaltered for 388 years. The hall is 123 feet long and 42 feet wide and 40 feet high, and contains numerous portraits and busts, which form part of the collection from the Faculty of Advocates. Another striking feature of Parliament Hall is the great window in the south wall. It was installed in 1866. It consists of 8,000 pieces of painted and stained glass covering 390 square feet. It celebrates the founding of the Court of Session in 1532 and shows King James V of Scotland presenting the Charter of Institution and Confirmation by Pope Clement VII to Alexander Milne, Abbot of Cambus Kenneth, who became the first Lord President of the Court, and who is shown kneeling before him. Gavin Dunbar, Archbishop of Glasgow and Lord Chancellor of Scotland, is depicted raising his right hand in blessing. The scene is witnessed by a throng of members of the clergy and the court. Also enthroned, and on the right of the king, is his mother Queen Margaret, widow of King James IV. The coats of arms in the head and lower portion of the window represent those who held office as Lord President of the Court of Session from 1532 until 1868, with the exception of the Royal Arms of Scotland and the arms of the Faculty of Advocates, which are in the lower part of the window. Passing beneath the great window, visitors enter into an area which was extended in 1819, from which two of the plain box courts, 10 and 11, and a larger court, number 12, are accessed. The floor of the Parliament Hall was originally paved with stone, but has been relaid more than once in wood. The Parliament of Scotland, a fully independent country for more than 800 years, evolved during the 13th century from the King's Council of Bishops and Earls, with the first identifiable parliament held in 1235 during the reign of Alexander II of Scotland, when it already possessed a political and judicial role. The first mention of borough representatives, those closest to the people, taking part in decision-making was in 1296. Consisting of the three estates of clerics, lay tenants-in-chief and borough commissioners, all sitting in a single chamber, the Scottish Parliament acquired significant powers over particular issues. Rather than being merely a rubber stamp for royal decisions, the Parliament of Scotland played an active role in Scottish affairs and, in the 15th and early 16th centuries, was a powerful counterweight to the power of the Stuart kings successfully opposing unpopular royal policies. This would have been impossible in neighbouring England, where the monarch ruled by divine right and could never be challenged, whereas in Scotland, the people themselves are sovereign, something which is still true today. As early as the reign of David II, the Scottish Parliament was able to prevent him pursuing his deeply unpopular policy of a union of the crowns with England, while the 15th century Stuart monarchs were consistently influenced by a prolonged period of parliamentary strength. The Parliament's strength was such that the Crown turned to corruption and political management to undermine its autonomy in the latter period of its existence. The chamber of the 1639 building was arranged in a square, non-confrontational layout where all the members looked in upon the throne. Again, this is entirely different to the English Parliament, which is adversarial in nature with two opposition parties facing each other on the benches. As Parliament was also the highest court in the kingdom, a court bar, the inner bar, was located before the throne for the accused to present themselves. There was also an outer bar, beyond which only members or invited individuals could pass onto the floor of the chamber. The Lord High Constable was responsible for the outer security of Parliament House, including the doors and the keys to the chamber, and their authority extended to the outer bar before the actual floor of the chamber. The Earl Marischal maintained order within the chamber, and their authority extended from the outer bar to the inner bar at the foot of the throne. The constable had a small corps of guards, and the Marischal was attended by 4 macers who kept order on the floor of the chamber and guarded the honours. The monarch, or the Lord High Commissioner, sat upon the elevated throne at the southern end of Parliament Hall, below which, on chairs, sat the Lord Chancellor, the presiding officer, and the officers of state. On the benches to the right of the throne, at the end closest to the throne, sat the archbishops and bishops until the abolition of the episcopacy in 1689. From then onwards, all of the benches to the right of the throne were occupied by the more junior earls and lords of Parliament, with the end section of these benches that was farthest from the throne occupied by the non-voting eldest sons and heirs of the nobles, where they could observe business with an eye to their future responsibilities. On the benches to the left of the throne sat the dukes, marquises, senior earls, viscounts, and senior lords of Parliament. On the benches facing the throne sat the borough commissioners to the right and the shire commissioners to the left. In the middle of the chamber were 3 tables. On the table nearest the throne were placed the honours of Scotland, the crown, sceptre, and sword of state, the presence of the honours signifying crown acceptance of the power of Parliament. The Lord High Constable and the Earl Marischal were seated on either side of this table. At the middle table sat the Lord Advocate, the Secretary of State, and the Lord Clerk Register, the Senior Clerk of Parliament, along with the 6 Clerks of Session in Parliament. At the third table, nearest to the Borough and Shire Commissioners, sat the Senators of the College of Justice, who, though unable to vote, could provide legal advice. This was the very chamber where history was made in 1706, and not for the better. Far from being a voluntary union with England for the mutual benefit of both countries, Scotland had been blockaded by England's more powerful navy, and soldiers were on the border ready for invasion if the Parliament did not accept the terms of the treaty. England also bribed Scottish nobles, threatening the property rights of Scots who owned lands in England to cajole Scotland into the Union. In the end, 110 voted for the treaty with 67 voting against. Scotland was effectively absorbed into England, which still has massive repercussions today. Scotland's huge resources, starting with the discovery in Scottish waters of its oil in the early 1960s, have been plundered by the government in London, and revenues that haven't been fully squandered have been used to invest mostly in London and the South East, which has kept most of the UK's economic activity centred there. Scotland also has no control over international trade policy, energy, its assets, or foreign policy as part of the UK. Scotland was also dragged out of the European single market against the express wishes of the people of Scotland when England voted for Brexit. And despite the fact that the current Scottish Parliament is a devolved assembly operating under Westminster's control, it has managed to demonstrate that, where Scotland is allowed to do things differently, Scotland has generally been more successful than England being able to invest its restricted budget in Scotland, which has given Scots a glimpse of what could be achieved with independence and full economic control. We all know what kind of future we all face in Scotland if we remain tied to a declining England and rule from the entitled political classes in the Palace of Westminster. Scots are already paying some of the highest energy bills in the world, despite being able to power Scotland through clean, cheap, renewable energy, and most households are getting poorer by the day. Even the middle classes are being squeezed out of existence. With the restoration of an independent Scottish Parliament, with all the powers of a normal independent country, our future would certainly be far brighter than it is under Westminster rule and the UK. Thanks for watching.